Hello, Biology 112. This is Joy Colley. Today we're going to take a look at Chapter 14, lecture notes, and Chapter 14 is dealing with the endocrine system. Endocrine system are all the glands in the body and ultimately the hormones that they produce. Like all body systems, we want to know what the function of the endocrine system is, and the function is to maintain control, homeostasis, by releasing hormones into the bloodstream. All of the glands of the body are going to release specific hormones. In this chapter, we're interested in the anatomy of those glands, where we find them in the body, and then what specific chemicals, what specific hormones each of them secretes. Hormones are like boss chemicals in the body. We often refer to them as managing or regulating body processes, but they're essentially the boss. They're going to tell other body parts, other structures, other organs what to do. And we have a term for whoever is going to react to the hormones, sort of like the employees. Those are going to be the target tissue. And we call those the employee cells. They're going to respond to the instructions. The idea being the hormone is specifically going to tell the kidney what to do. The kidney is the target tissue of that hormone. Not every tissue responds to every chemical, but the ones that do are considered the target tissue. The endocrine system is based on what we call negative feedback. And negative feedback, often called negative feedback loop or the negative feedback mechanism, is all about the idea that with homeostasis, you're looking at something that's in range, that's at a particular set point. And when you get out of range, that's a signal for the endocrine system to produce more hormone, more instruction for the body to do something. And then once you're back in range, you've re-hit the set point, that system kicks out and you produce less hormone. The analogy to negative feedback, or a very good example of negative feedback, is thinking about the thermostat in your house or your apartment. You have a set point, and the system does nothing until the temperature is either too high or too low. If it gets too high, it kicks on the air conditioning system. Things happen. That's the akin to sending signals, sending more hormones. And when you reach the set point, when the temperature drops, then you stop what you're doing. The system kicks off, and the endocrine system does the same thing by producing less hormone. That's a nice example of negative feedback. Okay, let's look at the glands. We're going to make a list. The first of these is the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is located in the brain beneath the hypothalamus. If you recall, when we looked at the brain in cross-section and we did the anatomy, the hypothalamus was part of the bird, the chicken head, and we had the eye of the chicken, and the hypothalamus specifically was the beak of the chicken. So dangling or hanging beneath the hypothalamus, beneath the entire brain, is the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is often referred to as the master gland in the body because it not only secretes lots of different hormones, but it secretes hormones that control other endocrine system glands as well. So lots of things are coming out of the pituitary gland. For example, the pituitary gland secretes growth hormone. Now you're going to see abbreviations throughout this entire chapter. GH for hormone, growth hormone. Pretty much in the endocrine system, H always is associated with hormone as an abbreviation. And growth hormone does exactly what you think it might do. It stimulates muscles and bones to grow. We're going to get this signal during adolescence, and we grow from our childhood size to our adulthood size as our muscles and bones grow under the influence of GH. We also see prolactin, PRL. Prolactin, the lactin is associated with lactose, milk production, and this stimulates milk production in pregnant females. We also see a chemical known as thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, just the first capital letters there. That's going to regulate and control the thyroid gland. That's another endocrine gland, and that's very common for things that come out of the pituitary to ultimately control another part of the endocrine system. Pituitary gland also secretes what we call gonadotropic hormones. Your gonads are your reproductive organs, so that's going to be your paired ovaries in female and your paired testes in male. And so the gonadotropics are going to regulate egg production in female and sperm production in males for reproduction. We also get ADH, antidiuretic hormone. This is signaling the kidneys and telling the kidneys to conserve or hold on to the water that we have in the body. So we're conserving or keeping the water. And as a result, that tends to decrease the output of urine, decrease the volume of urine that leaves the body, because the water is being saved or conserved under the influence of antidiuretic hormone. And then the last hormone of interest is oxytocin. That pituitary gland actually secretes more than this list, but we're just getting a sample. Oxytocin is associated with strong muscle contractions in the body, and a good example for this associated with the notes is childbirth. Oxytocin is what naturally regulates the strong muscle contractions during that process. There is a synthetic drug, Pitocin, that's given to pregnant women to try to induce labor, and that works with the oxytocin naturally produced by the body during that process. So we see the pituitary gland, and there's a similar diagram in your textbook that shows all the different parts of the body that are going to be influenced either directly or indirectly by the master gland, pituitary. All right, we continue our list of endocrine glands. We have the thyroid gland. It's located in the neck region below the larynx. The larynx is your voice box. It's kind of the pink tissue in this diagram. I've heard it described sort of as a letter H, a big capital letter H, as it wraps around your trachea below your larynx. Thyroid gland is going to produce thyroid chemicals. We call the T for thyroid, T3 and T4. This controls cell growth and metabolism. Overall, how your body cells, all your body cells, process energy, process calories, process nutrients. Sometimes you'll hear that an individual has thyroid issues, and that can result in weight gain or weight loss, because overall it's the T chemicals, it's the T hormones that are going to determine your base metabolism. Thyroid gland is also involved in homeostasis of calcium. Ca is calcium, and calcitonin specifically decreases calcium in the blood. We take in calcium into our body through digestion. It makes its way into the blood. Calcitonin says, get that calcium out of the blood and put it into the bones. So this is going to help us grow healthy bone. Calcium is put into those structures, and we think about calcium being associated with strong bones. It's under the influence of this chemical that we take it out of the blood and store it. Our third endocrine gland is very similar in name to the second one. Instead of the thyroid, it's the parathyroid, and it's actually located in the exact same location. In fact, the parathyroid gland, the parathyroid tissue, is associated, stuck to the backside, the posterior of the thyroid. So in the neck, the pink tissue is the thyroid, but the yellow or golden tissue in this diagram, we see sort of little patches of it. That's parathyroid. It's on the backside, the posterior of the thyroid. If we look at this in a slightly different way, the pink tissue here is the thyroid. If we were to flip it around and look at the backside, the little orange areas, there are always two on either side, two areas or two patches, so it looks like 4 dots. Those are the parathyroid tissue. And the good news is parathyroid only secretes one hormone. That hormone is called parathyroid hormone. Let me abbreviate that PTH. So the parathyroid gland produces parathyroid hormone. It's the counterpoint to calcitonin from the thyroid, so it's also involved with calcium. It does exactly the opposite of calcitonin. It increases calcium in the blood by pulling it out of the bones. So fundamentally, we're just storing calcium, like you'd store something in your attic. If you need it, you're going to go and get it. So if the body needs calcium, it's going to go and get it, and it's going to get it from the bones. So it does this exact opposite of calcitonin. So between calcitonin from the thyroid gland and PTH from the parathyroid, we're able to balance just the right amount, that's homeostasis, balance just the right amount of calcium for our body's needs. Adrenal glands are located on top of each of the kidneys, the superior aspect of the kidney. Two kidneys, so we have two adrenal glands. Renal, as a term, always refers to the kidneys, so adrenal gives us a really good hint where we are in the body, located within the abdominal cavity. Adrenal glands, plural, is going to give us a couple of hormones. Aldosterone, this helps us control a couple of very specific ions in the body. Sodium, Na is sodium, and potassium, K, is potassium. So we're balancing, getting just the right amount of those important ions in the body under the influence of aldosterone. We also see epinephrine. Epinephrine has an AKA that we're probably familiar with. Epinephrine is also known as adrenaline. Notice that the word adrenaline has the entire name of the gland, adrenal, in it. We think about our adrenaline surging when we get excited, when the sympathetic nervous system is enacted, and that's exactly what's happening. It's going to stimulate sympathetic nervous system, that's your fight or flight, for short-term alertness. There's a companion chemical called norepinephrine or noradrenaline that does the exact same thing, stimulates your fight or flight when you are hyped up for short-term alertness. All of those chemicals come from the adrenal glands. In the abdominal cavity, posterior beneath the stomach, we have the pancreas. The pancreas in that abdominal cavity. There we see the pancreas located. Pancreas itself is kind of bumpy glandular tissue, kind of tucked up under some of those abdominal cavities. We see the pancreas all by itself. It looks kind of weird, but it's got that cottage cheese sort of texture. And the pancreas is going to produce two important hormones, one of which we've likely heard of. That's insulin. Insulin is associated with blood sugar or glucose, and the role of insulin is to tell the body to decrease glucose levels in the bloodstream. The counterpoint, the other opposite chemical that's going to do the exact opposite thing, is what we call glucagon. I've heard it pronounced glucagon as well. It does the exact opposite. It's going to increase glucose levels in the bloodstream. So between these two chemicals, under normal circumstances, we have just the right amount of, that's homeostasis, just the right amount of blood sugar. Deep within the brain, we have another endocrine gland that starts with a P. I say another one because the very first one we listed was the pituitary gland. Here we have the pineal or pineal. I learned it pine, like a pine tree, the pineal gland, and it is within the brain, so deep within the tissue. Pituitary kind of hangs or dangles beneath the hypothalamus, but the pineal gland is surrounded by brain tissue. Here we see a comparison of the pituitary and the pineal. Pineal gland secretes melatonin. Now, melatonin is a supplement that you can purchase over the counter at your local drugstore, and it's usually associated with a supplement associated with sleep and regulating your sleep, but that's essentially what it does naturally. It regulates what we call your biorhythms. Biorhythms are your sleep cycles. The idea is some people are naturally kind of morning people. You know, they wake up with the sun, happy, they wake the rooster, they're ready to go. Other people are more night owls. They don't do so well in the morning, but they are really productive towards the evening time. Those are what we talk about, your natural biorhythms. And melatonin from the pineal gland is regulating those cycles in individuals. And then the last hormones of interest are the gonads. The gonads, once again, are your reproductive organs, ovaries in female and testes in male, located in the pelvic region, internal to the abdomen, or external in the scrotal area, depending on if we're talking female anatomy or male anatomy. We'll look first at the female anatomy. The ovaries are going to produce two important hormones. The first is what we call estrogen. Estrogen does a couple of things. It regulates secondary sexual characteristics and maintains pregnancy. So once the body is pregnant, it's estrogen that's in charge of maintaining the uterus and maintaining the connection to the placenta. And when we say secondary sexual characteristics, primary sexual characteristics are the actual anatomy, the structures that make a female female, the uterus, the vagina, the ovaries. But secondary sexual characteristics are what develop in adulthood. As girl becomes woman during puberty, there are certain changes in the body, and those are secondary sexual characteristics. We think of breast formation, widening of the hips, hair growing in the axillary region, hair growing in the pubic region. As girl becomes woman, those are secondary sexual characteristics, and those are going to be controlled by estrogen. Companion hormone in the females is progesterone. Progesterone regulates the menstrual cycle, so it's essentially in control when the body is not pregnant. It's prepping and preparing for pregnancy, so the concept of ovulation, releasing an egg, maintaining the uterus, and ultimately sloughing the uterus for the menstrual cycle, that's under the role of progesterone. When we look at males and the testes, there is one hormone, testosterone. It's got sort of the whole part of testy in there. And testosterone we think of as the primary male hormone. It regulates secondary male sexual characteristics and sperm production. Secondary sexual characteristics in male are those things that change in adolescence as boy becomes man. So we think of the widening of the chest, hair growth on the chest, hair growth associated with the armpits. Those are secondary sexual characteristics controlled by testosterone. And then the last part of this chapter is dealing with what happens when hormone levels are off, when they're not regulated properly. And there's some terminology here that might not be 100% politically correct, but we stick with the terminology in the textbook. The first of which we talk about, the first condition for abnormal hormone is dwarfism. And dwarfism is a circumstance where during development there's not enough growth hormone from the pituitary gland, and as a result the individual does not grow to a quote normal stature. So individuals tend to be shorter than the average. The opposite of dwarfism is gigantism. And it's the opposite because instead of decreased levels of growth hormone, they're increased levels. So the body is stimulated to grow more than average. Gigantism. The thyroid can cause trouble. It can either underproduce or overproduce. In this case, overproduction, hyperthyroidism. Remember, hyper means more or greater. This is also known as Graves' disease. It's an increase in your thyroid hormones. Thyroid hormones normally control metabolism. So if you get too much of the thyroid hormone, it speeds up the metabolism. Individuals tend to have a very rapid heart rate, kind of act a little bit nervous, their eyes bulge out. Because they're processing things much quicker than normal, they're burning through calories and energy. You see weight loss. The thyroid itself can swell, can enlarge, and that can be something that's used in diagnosing hyperthyroidism. The opposite of this is hypothyroidism. Hypo means less or below, so it's a decreased amount of T3. And exactly the opposite things are going to happen. It slows down overall body metabolism. So individuals appear tired or sluggish. They're not processing energy very efficiently. So individuals with hypothyroidism often gain weight. They just look sort of tired diagnostically. There's a classic study where they show an individual that was diagnosed with hypothyroidism in the pictures on the left, and then once he was treated for and balanced his thyroid hormones on the right. And you see a difference not only in the weight of the individual, but sort of the attention and the attitude when thyroid hormone is controlled. We've often heard of osteoporosis. We sort of associate this with older individuals and primarily with women. But osteo means bone. Porosis refers to pores in the bone, holes in the bone. And this is because of an increase in parathyroid hormone, PTH. PTH tells the body to remove the calcium from the bones. So if you have too much PTH, you're removing too much calcium from the bones. And as a result, those bones can become brittle. Osteoporosis is often referred to as brittle bones disease. And then when we think about hormone levels and we think about the pancreas, we often hear the term diabetes in the United States. Turns out there are two specific types of diabetes depending on the hormone involved, but the one we're familiar with, the one that involves insulin, is diabetes mellitus or mellitus. It's a decrease in insulin and it results in high blood sugar. We think about individuals testing their sugar, and long-term diabetes can result in circulation issues, stroke, blindness, lots of issues associated with controlling the amount of insulin. That's diabetes mellitus. There's also another type of diabetes that has nothing to do with blood sugar, that has nothing to do with insulin, diabetes insipidus, totally separate disease involving a totally separate hormone. This is low levels underproduction of ADH, antidiuretic hormone that comes from the pituitary gland. And ADH tells the body to conserve or hold on to water. So if you don't get the message to hold on to the water, you lose that water. You lose that water primarily through urination. Sometimes gallons and gallons of urine are produced in a day, and that results in massive water loss and dehydration. Diabetes insipidus has to do with antidiuretic hormone. All right, and that is the end of Chapter 14. I greatly appreciate your attention. Thank you.